There it is. So, sorry I missed last week. Hope everything, or last Wednesday. So I got back in a little bit, or later this last weekend, and since I was on a plane, I guess it's inevitable that you get a cold or some nonsense. So I'm not feeling great. I'm going to do as best I can to get, I want to wrap up the discussion on Sartre, transitions into Simone De Beauvoir, probably only cover her ethics of ambiguity today, maybe touch on her work on the second sex, and transition that into next class, which is on Monday. That's just too much material. I think I'm going to focus on Yancey. I've been trying to figure out how to cut Yancey's article down. It's a pretty long one. He writes a lot. He's verbose, I guess you could say. Instead of finding a way of cutting that and yet keeping it meaningful or keeping a collective whole so that it makes sense, I've decided just to read. You're going to have the whole thing. It ties together Simone de Beauvoir. It's a Beauvoirian examination, in fact. So if I don't get through Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex, which I won't be able to get to today, it will come up in Yancey's. So I've amended online. It'll say Lewis Gordon's Bad Faith and Anti-Black Racism. It's now suggested. It's a complex reading, and it takes more time than I'm going to have for next time to make sense of. However, it should make more sense now to you than it would have prior to having read Jean-Paul Sartre. So his contemporary existentialist argument with respect to racism will be a little bit more clear, and that's going to be the case for George Yancey's reading as well. It's a bit long, and he uses a lot of vocabulary, but I hope after you've gone through, and I'll review some of the stuff today from Sartre and his central concepts. I'm jumping right into the middle, in fact, of the slides, or actually toward the end, because I don't want to have to redo it. You had the slides available to you, but I want to just go through as much of this last bit of Sartre, focus on a couple of key points, in particular his argument for free will, which is essential. And that will then connect us to Simone de Beauvoir, Sartre's, or rather, Sartre was Simone de Beauvoir's long-term companion. I think I reversed it last time, and I almost always do. I almost always say, and this is Simone de Beauvoir, the longtime companion of the philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre, which is an interesting thing to do, but I do catch myself because there's a concern that we only define her in connection with Jean-Paul Sartre. Go ahead.
I like to say she smashed instead of the other way around.
She smashed. She smashed?
Versus he smashed?
Oh, he smashed. Yes? I don't know the phrase, he or she smashed. Does that mean you did well? Does that mean you did really well? No. What does it mean? How the hell do all of you know what this means? I've never heard of this, he smashed.
It's the same thing as get laid.
Oh.
Smash.
Really? Okay. I don't want anyone complaining about philosophers coining new terms. Why do we need this new term, en soi, for itself, in itself? Why do we need so many terms for getting drunk and having sex? see my point? You jumped in on a weird time. In any case. Maybe, I suppose. In any case, next time you feel compelled to say, why so many new terms for the same thing? Let us remember the smashing about. All right, so thank you for that example, though. Now I'll use that. What does Jean-Paul Sartre, or if you're arrogant, Jean-Paul Sartre, what is his concept of freedom? Well, there's a lot to it, and I use this image, this painting. I've forgotten who it is. It says in the corner there, two men holding arrows. But I use it, and I don't even know if this was the intention of the artist, but I'm going to use it anyway. It seems to imply a conception of Sartrean freedom. Another way of looking at it is compatibilism, but that's not Sartre. Sartre is not a compatibilist with respect to free will and determinism. A compatibilist is somebody who says the world is determined. There are things that are set, so to speak, in stone. You see the marbleized arrow there. Yet that's not incompatible with the conception of human freedom. Sartre is not that sort of compatibilist. I think there's ways of perhaps pigeonholing him into that. And you can see the cloudy area, although it's pointing the other direction, which kind of confuses things. Here, I think, is a useful image for trying to make sense of these abstract concepts of facticity and transcendence. The transcendence is essential, but so is the facticity. And any time we deny one of these poles, so to speak, we are in what?
Bad.
All right, so you voiced bad faith. We're in bad faith, which is a kind of what?
Self-deception. Why?
Yes. Why?
Lie.
Oh, a lie. Yes, I thought you said why. Yes, the transcendence is this kind of projection. This is where the freedom lies. This is and think of the term project or projecting into that which is not yet. I don't want to get into the metaphysics of his consciousness, but consider that he thinks of consciousness as a lack, as a nothingness, just as the future, which has not yet, is a nothingness. And we are our facticity. We cannot ignore that. That is our being. De Beauvoir uses this concept, this term, being, quite a bit. Do you mind hitting the air conditioning before we get... I feel like I've already said too much and I'm getting too hot already. I'm not even standing up. Do you mind if I remain seated for today? You do mind?
Oh, no.
Oh, you don't mind? Okay. Because otherwise I would. I'd stand.
You could sit.
All right. I choose. My facticity is my past. My facticity are the contingent factors that go into my background, that go into my being, that go into who I am and what I am. But if I then simply deny my transcendence, I deny that which is enabling me to project, so to speak, beyond my facticity, beyond these contingencies. And he uses the word contingent in a strange way. And he gets this from an earlier novel. He uses the term with respect to his existence. His existence is contingent. And he means that in contrast to necessary. Our existence is not necessary. In the philosophical concepts, in the philosophy of religion, which, do I need to mention, next semester. Now is about the time I think you're going to start to sign up for classes. Please sign up for the philosophy of religion. Also, while I'm on it, honors. If you're not in honors or you don't know about honors, look into the honors program. Many of you, all of you should look into everyone in this class should look into the honors program. I'm not kidding. You need to have a certain GPA, but there are ways of getting you into the program anyway. Once you get it, look online into honors. Once you get into honors, your chances of getting where you want to go, amazing. Next semester, it's honors ethics for philosophy. There's a ton of other classes in honors as well. This semester it's honors intro, so you missed that. If you're here the semester after that, you can try again. Did you have a question?
No.
Oh, just stretching. In any case, in the philosophy of religion, let's do those commercials real quick. We think about our existence as contingent, and what philosophers such as Aristotle through Aquinas mean by that is basically there was a time in which we did not exist, and Sartre accepts that concept of it and distinguishes us from necessary beings, but he really means by this not just that there was a time in which we didn't exist, but that we come into the existence based upon an accident. It's kind of the word he would use, that we had no control over. Our existence is not determined, it's not set up, and we're back to what he wrote in Existentialism as a Humanism. Our existence precedes our essence. We do not already have inbuilt within us a kind of essence that is necessary. There's no human nature, and there's certainly no individual nature until we are born. Our existence is merely contingent. We are things in the world. As De Beauvoir will put it, quoting Montaigne, we are thinking reeds. We are beings in itself, which is to say a thing, but we are beings for ourselves as well, in that we are conscious. And she'll use the word ambiguous. He'll use this constant transition between, or this constant tension. I like to, a lot of you put that in your quizzes, tension between transcendence and factistic. Yes.
This isn't really important, but I was wondering what he would think about how, like the hard determinist view about like how, they say like everything is kind of lined up to happen. So like everything that's happened up until now was going to happen, it was inevitable. So how would he connect that to kind of like it being an accident and like fate and all that kind of stuff?
That sounds like our existence then is necessary. If it's determined in that way, if you want predetermined, then there's no way it could have been otherwise. And that removes our freedom, and that takes our existence out of its contingency in the way he's using it. So he's not a determinist at all in that respect. So he would just deny that outright. And we'll see a little bit more about why his unique conception of free will in a moment.
Do people think that, like, reproduction and stuff is for, like, for whatever of the species? And, like, could it be seen in essence if your parents, like, created, like, a reason for you to be alive?
Oh, no. That's a good point. Then the parents take on the role of God. Well, you are in bad faith if you say something like, well, my parents determined me to be this way. I think Sartre goes further, and De Beauvoir, we'll see, backs off a bit and says, no, the world confronts us. We butt up against it. We cannot be as radically free as Sartre presumes. However, Sartre would say, no, you are thrown into a situation. In this case, your parents have constructed you. Maybe they've engaged in genetic meddling. What's the word? Genetic modification to make sure you're the way they want them, like you're a Shar-Pei or something. They want you to be just, how we make Shar-Peis, the dogs, the fluff. They're not things that happen in nature. We created them, basically. And so we have like a kind of child that's a petri dish. I want to make an image of me. I want him to be exactly like me. He's going to become an existentialist, in particular a Sartrean existentialist. And I'm going to work on molding everything he does into that fashion. There's still a point at which, and Sartre's not clear on where this is, in the way that De Beauvoir is more so, when this child is no longer merely a free in the natural sense, but free in the moral sense, such that now I realize I have an open and projected future. If I've been conditioned, if I have been brainwashed, if I have been built, it's hard to imagine I have room for freedom. And I become a thing that my parents have made me into, and they are engaging in extreme oppression in that sense. And I honestly don't have a Sartrean response that's a good one, other than to say that those parents are acting in bad faith too by denying my freedom to be what I would become. Which takes us to this. So that's a good transition. Here he is, looking rather sharp, sartorially speaking. Oh, that's a good one, sartorially. Sartorial has to do with clothes, and his name is Sartre. Dude, that's actually... Yeah, it's good. It just occurred to me. You know what? Let's end class now because it's only going to get worse. I'm not going to come up with anything better. We are condemned to be free. Why are we condemned to be free? Because every projecting forward, every conscious thought, even if we try, even if we will, our lack of freedom, and De Beauvoir will examine this as well, we are engaging in a free act, right? You cannot escape this freedom. We are radically free, unlike any other human-made artifact which has its essence given to it. And since there's no God, this is review. Since there's no God for Sartre, there's no divine giver of a human essence. Individuals must make themselves in and through each choice. These slides are posted for you. Individuals must make themselves in and through. And De Beauvoir goes along with this view as well, pushing for an ethical position in a way that Sartre, at the very end of this giant text, Sartre finally says a little bit about ethics, but not much. It's De Beauvoir who follows and makes more of an explicit attempt at an existential ethics that is based upon a lot of the basic principles that we find within Jean-Paul Sartre. So here I'm going to try to give you a standard logical form argument, which may upset Sartreans. I apologize. But here's an effort to get a sense of what Jean-Paul Sartre is up to. And we'll briefly now analyze this. So premise one. For a state of affairs, that is a situation, an instance of something happening, to deterministically cause our actions, the determining factors must be wholly dependent upon that state of affairs. There can't be anything outside of that state of affairs, of that situation, of that causal, I think situation is actually the best word for it. Premise two, a given state of affairs has no meaning in itself. If anything's unclear, ask me, but otherwise assume it's true for the sake of argument, and we'll see if the argument goes through. Number three, the meaning of a state of affairs is what possesses causal powers. I'll let that sink in a moment. The meaning of a state of affairs, the meaning of a given situation, the meaning of a given phenomenon, the meaning of a given object that's before us. It's the meaning that has the causal powers. And finally, the meaning of a state of affairs must be established by I say person, but the experiencing consciousness, if you want to leave room for the possibility of non-human animals having freedom, I don't know. Even if done through emotions, which he calls, I should have added the quotes there, strategies for coping with the world. And finally, no given state of affairs can deterministically cause our actions, which means we are condemned to be free. And there's a lot there. Premise 4, 3 and 4, probably the biggest ones. And the concept of his distinction of emotions is probably very different than you might consider. So we'll talk about both of those. This is a unique argument for free will. What are your thoughts? Did you want to? Oh, yeah. Sorry. No worries.
I might be misinterpreting this, but it seems like he contradicts himself in 2 and 3 when he says a given state of affairs has no meaning, and then saying the meaning of a state of affairs is what possesses causal powers.
Yeah, that's confusing. A given state of affairs has no meaning in itself, though. You got to add that. So
you're saying be given meaning?
Yes, individually. Not necessarily collectively. This is going to be one of the issues that existentialists have to deal with, in particular with ethics. And it goes back to Friedrich Nietzsche, who we'll see again with respect to ethics. This kind of subjectivity. How do we make sense of a world that's seemingly meaningful only due to a purely subjectivist approach? That is, the individual's, the meaning that an individual imparts to something. So, meaning of a state of affairs is what possesses causal powers. A state of affairs has no causal powers without having meaning, and meaning is only attributed to it by conscious beings. That is, how we confront it and what it means to us. That's what gives it causal powers. He gives an example, let me just give you one example, of poverty and what it means for one to be in poverty. I don't think this was in the section you had. But depending upon how one responds to it and the meaning one gives to poverty, if one sees poverty as a kind of situation in which one is now seen as having greater, closer familial ties, and that's all that one sees and all the meaning one gets out of this concept, then it's unclear that one would see the need for accumulation of wealth as a positive thing, or see poverty necessarily as a negative thing. So it doesn't have any meaning, and De Beauvoir is going to focus on this too, outside of any subjective willing. And we only attribute meaning to things based upon our subjectivity toward it. I'll give another example in a moment. Now that may be too strong because it puts a lot on the individual. What if I see poverty as horrible? Well, stop giving it that meaning. What if I haven't eaten in 3 days? What the hell do I do there? It's not just saying think positively, but it's hard to avoid that kind of trivial response. I saw another. Oh, actually, you had your hand twice. So you had another point? No? Go ahead.
What is where does it imply a condemnation of freedom in the rest of the argument?
I'm sorry. It's not a condemnation of freedom. It's that it's weird language. We, individual human beings, are condemned to be free. Normally, freedom doesn't sound like it's a negative, but in this case, you cannot escape your freedom.
Can't escape your freedom.
And that's the content. Yeah.
But you can't.
You're trapped in freedom. In no word, I don't know what the positive one is. You cannot escape your freedom.
But it sounds like it's saying like you can't give the meaning of your circumstances. Like your circumstances inevitably affect like the way that you are and the choices that you make, and like it's,
That's your facticity. That's true. It affects, but doesn't determine. And I always have the free choice. This is part of that transcendence outside of and into a not, which is not yet.
what
My
about, like I don't know, like things like PTSD that
Yeah.
like forces you to behave in certain ways.
That's like I said before, his radical freedom, I think, may be where we find counterexamples somewhat easily. And it may be that in certain cases with people with PTSD or people who are, even somebody who has significant damage, he would have to admit that those are not the individuals that I'm referring to here.
Okay.
Maybe those are exceptional cases. To give a credible or charitable reading to him, I think that's what he would have to say.
Just thinking about that example with people who have like PTSD and stuff, I was just kind of throwing out like an extreme kind of way of thinking about it. Like if you want to think about it, like what happens when you get PTSD is I guess your body reacting to like a traumatic situation. You know, you see bombs drop long enough, your body's going to start to like expect it everywhere. Yeah, so
Yeah.
your body is almost like naturally choosing to associate these things with that like fear now.
Yeah.
So you could say like your body is still choosing to do it, you know, it's not you consciously.
Right, and that I wanted to use this example because he uses it himself, although I just found this painting to give you the image of it. One sec. So how we see the world is a function of our chosen project, and that's also with respect to our emotions as well. He says this on premise 4, even our emotions are, they used to be called passions, which sounds passive, and a lot of people think emotions are things that happen to us. I can't control my emotions. Sartre disagrees with that and says that these are, in fact, in the reading, he actually calls them a magical way of he uses the word magic, of confronting the world. And we do have control over them. We do have control over the emotions because those are ways of seeing the world. Now, you could use the example of the mountain. Do I see it? Do I choose to see it as an obstacle, as a challenge, as an inspiration, a sacred object? Each of those ways of seeing it are chosen. However, back to your point of PTSD, I might automatically choose it, and as you're saying, bodily, where there's no transcendence available. So there one is stuck in one's facticity and cannot escape the past. Sartre would call that bad faith, but that has a moral implication to it that we wouldn't want to ascribe to somebody who's suffering from post-traumatic stress. And again, I don't know what Sartre would say about that particular case, if not say that that's an exception, although he doesn't allow for many exceptional cases with his radical freedom.
With the Dostoevsky reading, when in the beginning he was talking about himself and transitioning into this concept of people being more conscious than others, is Sartre specifically talking about those who are more conscious than others are condemned to be free, or
No.
are the other people also condemned?
Everyone,
to be free?
yeah.
And is this condemnation of freedom, which I know that was incorrect, but that's the only way I can kind of phrase this.
No, that is the word.
Okay.
But don't say condemnation of freedom, because that sounds like freedom's bad. It's I'm condemned to be free. It's me who, because of my radical freedom, experience what Kierkegaard, and here he's getting it from Kierkegaard, experience as anguish.
That
Angst.
vary gradually from those who are less
Yes.
conscious, those who are more
I
conscious.
see what you're
And
saying.
if so, can there be someone who is not condemned to be free because they are not able to recognize their own freedom?
Yeah, very good question. I think he would call those individuals who are in bad faith and denying the transcendence and relying only upon, and this is the easy way of being. They're more like animals. Animals are comfortable in the world. They're at ease, except for squirrels. They look like they're always on the verge of death, because they are. Because hawks can get them, people can get them, lawnmowers can get them. It's a terrible life. But his point about animals is that they don't have the kind of conscious, and this is true for Dostoevsky, this was true for Camus, and this was true for De Beauvoir and Sartre, that they don't have that conscious awareness of this lack, this future, this projection. Instead, they only have their facticity, and they're not condemned to it because they don't have freedom, right? And so there's no condemnation there, but there's also no humanity there. There's also no project there. There's also no moral sense there. But with a human who is, and if they are ignorant of it, the question then becomes, is it a culpable ignorance? Is it a willful ignorance? Sartre will almost always say, at some point you're old enough, and where that is, I don't know, he doesn't say, you're going to be in bad faith because you're denying that fundamental element of your condition, not your nature, but your condition. And so it would always be for him a culpable ignorance. You should know better, which is what another putting it. What you're doing is lying to yourself about the choices that you have, and you're hiding from that freedom because choice is shitty. I like it when somebody tells me, go to the store and get these things. There's an image of the cheese aisle and me as the scream. Did I show you that image of the Edward Monk's The Scream and then the cheese aisle? If I'm not told what to get, and this is a silly example perhaps, but it's the kind of anxiety that comes with having, and it's on you to make that choice. And that choice is not just affecting you, it affects other people, not just the cheese one. But every choice changes the world in the sense that in a way that we want it to be. And so we are making that choice to change the world, not just for ourselves. Did you?
You kind of answered my question. I was going to ask, does Sartre acknowledge the possibility of abstaining from judgment? So like just looking at a mountain and not choosing not to judge it in any particular way. I mean,
what are you doing then?
A hard thing to even like.
I guess if you're a Buddhist and you're really good at meditation, you can pick an object to calm your mind and empty it of thoughts. But even that is a choice. And so there's a motivation behind the meditation to empty the mind, to the extent that that's even possible. Sartre, I think, would deny that one ever really empties the mind. So
think that that's a possibility?
It would be analogous to saying, what if I refrain from choosing? What have I just done? I've chosen. So there's
It's not a conscious decision, like if it's just something that comes,
Yeah, good. Sartre doesn't go into that enough, but De Beauvoir does. Sartre will talk about spontaneity, and there being a kind of element of freedom. It's De Beauvoir who tells us that spontaneity, and you think about what is spontaneous, it just kind of, happens, I almost said spontaneously. What am I thinking of? What comes to mind when you hear spontaneous? Oh, that's not where I wanted to go. Yeah, didn't want to go with that. Spontaneous combustion. That's funny. That's threw my mind the other direction. Now I can't control where I wanted it to go elsewhere. Things that happen spontaneously that seem to be without conscious thinking. But once I have done something out of that spontaneity, it still has come from me. I still have to explain where that spontaneity came from. It's not magical. It's from me. It's maybe not conscious in the moment, but I then, after the fact, explain. Here's my activity, here are my actions. We get back to the PTSD example and makes it a little bit more complex, and De Beauvoir seems to leave a little more room for the confrontation of the world that butts up against us. We still have a kind of freedom that's pretty radical for De Beauvoir, but she seems to be more open to examples like the PTSD ones. Did you have another comment about it? No? And then come back to you.
Like with the spontaneous, action, you say like per se, I knock my water bottle here off my desk and then catch it.
Oh, okay.
Immediately.
Yeah.
A spontaneous moment.
Yeah.
There's no time in between it being here and here for me to think, I need to catch that.
No, that's true.
Now.
Yeah.
I go and catch it.
Right.
But then afterwards, it was still a product of.
What one could say from a Sartre perspective is that we might habituate ourselves or condition ourselves to act in the way that you just did, which is kind of like a lizard that catches food with its tongue. It's probably the case that that lizard is aware but not consciously, in the way that when you're driving you see cars, but you don't consciously bring them into your awareness. You can't live your entire life like that. No one can, at least Sartre would say this, no one can fully live that lizard-like existence and be considered still a human being. You have an explanation of what happened after the fact. It may have been spontaneous and it may have been below the level of consciousness, but now after the fact you describe it and you own it, so to speak, and you tell a narrative as to how that went down. I forgot. I need to move on. Go ahead.
Going back to your spontaneity thing, I've heard like improvisation in jazz music being described as spontaneous.
That's a good example.
Composition.
Yeah. Now the difference there, or what Sartre would say, if I could stick with this, and weirdly married to a different idea within cognitive science, economics, Daniel Kahneman in his book Thinking Fast and Slow, I think Kahneman and Sartre, at least in this context, would have a similar description of that kind of thing. I think there's intuition involved there. A jazz musician who's, I mean, if I just started playing jazz, I don't know how to play jazz, but I just started messing around and I did a solo on, this is bass, by the way, and it's like, whoa, that was, you know, like all over the place. I say, yeah, that's jazz. I said, no, it isn't. A jazz player may not know what the hell he or she is going to do on stage during a solo performance. But it's not because they're just going to let it flow magically. It's because they put in hours and hours and hours of playing, of practicing, of doing. What was the other example? Music, and what was the other one? Did you say jazz and something else?
Dancing.
No, that was it. I just called it improvisation.
Oh, improvisation. Yeah. Oh, I was thinking improv, like stand-up or something. Same thing. You don't just jump into doing improv without having any practice. You go through school. You go to Second City TV or Second City Improv and all sorts of.
Improv class tonight.
Yeah, that takes practice. It's not, hey, just do whatever comes to mind. No, that's embarrassing and difficult. Just as you don't just pick up a guitar and start playing. So. The spontaneity is still from me. And it would be weird if we said, you know, that was really impressive. Until you did your solo. Then it looked like you weren't even conscious. It didn't even look like you were there. You looked like you were, in Plato's language, with poetry. Oh, fuck. Out of body, that's not the word. Inspired, which literally means the muses are using you as a conduit. And you're just a thing, like an instrument. Well, we don't think that way. We say, that was impressive, what you just did, even if that person was not fully conscious in the moment and it was spontaneous, intuitive, and so forth. I think there's a lot of interesting areas of overlap in existentialist thought, phenomenology, and cognitive science with respect, and music, for that matter. All right, there's a few things I want to skip to. Let me jump to this example. Because this is a hotly contested example, this and the waiter one. So Sartre uses this as an example for bad faith. It's a very well-known example, and not everyone agrees that this matches his conception of bad faith, of self-deception, of denying one's transcendence, or of denying one's facticity. And there's, I don't know if you can read this. This is Sartre, who is interrupting a date. This is from Existential Comics. It's fantastic. You should check it out. He says, aha, but Sally, do you really want to go to the party, or are you just going along with it because it's easier than making a choice that stems from your own freedom? I mean, to be honest, you aren't really my type. She's talking about her date, which is seated here. And I don't like your roommates, and I would rather just go home and read something. Sorry. Exactly. You should always strive to be your own authentic self. You don't have to be rude, of course, but don't agree to things that you don't want to do just to avoid making this. This seems like a lot more to read than I thought it would be. Read this on your own. It's meant to be funny. And he comes out and says, talking about authenticity. He uses authenticity, not authentic. And I think there's a reason for that. Maybe he uses authentic once or twice in the whole thing. But authenticity, which is implying a striving for it. And he seems to imply toward the end of the reading you had for last time, and De Beauvoir seems to say the same thing with respect to our ambiguous nature. We're never out of that tension. We're never out of that uncomfortable space between our facticity and our transcendence, and a lot of other modalities that De Beauvoir mentions, but between our being conscious beings and things in the world, right? De Beauvoir is a, I guess you could say, a dualist, and so is Sartre, but not in the way that substance dualists are. They try to figure out and solve the problem, try to dismiss one or the other of the polarity there. But De Beauvoir and Sartre both see this drive for authenticity is finding, I don't even know if it's a happy medium, because you're never done with it. Your projects are never complete. And I'll give one example of what I mean, or what Sartre means by this. He talks about a gambler who wants to stop gambling. This can go for any example. And he makes a decision, a will. I'm going to stop gambling. He promises this to himself. And he does this so he doesn't have to, presumably, going forward, have to keep re-upping this promise. But of course, what happens? His friends say, hey, you want to play some poker tonight? No, I don't. Or whatever the issue is, right? Whatever the addictive behavior might be, for example. And eventually he comes to the point where he has to, again, continually confront that promise, if you want, to himself, that desire, that hope that he doesn't engage in gambling again. He has to continually do this. De Beauvoir will take up that theme with ethics. You're never done training, so to speak, to be an ethical person. You're not finished. You don't take an ethics class and then say, all right, finished. It's constantly working at it, constantly re-upping it, like the jazz musician. You're never done playing. And if you are, and you think you're content just playing Stairway to Heaven over and over again, well, you're in bad faith. I'm sorry, did you have a question earlier?
I have a question about the inauthenticity thing, but that was just in the previous
Sorry,
slide.
yes. Yep.
And start in the bottom left slide says, you could have saved yourselves both a lot of trouble, which implies a negative connotation, which makes it seem like inauthenticity is going to lead to a negative outcome. And would Sartre account for something where these individuals both make inauthentic decisions to go to this party and end up having a good time? Now, it's not likely to happen, and I've been in situations before where I've made that kind of bad faith decision, and it's not worked out well for me. But I've also made decisions in bad faith that have worked out well, and
Interesting.
I'm not sure if inauthenticity is something that should be avoided every time, if that's the case.
Sincerity, I think, may be a better term sometimes for these kind. That's another issue here. A kind of sincerity is lacking in those social engagements.
I'm not sure.
And it's interesting that you might find, from a consequentialist, utilitarian perspective, you know what? It's not always great to be insincere. I'm sorry, to be sincere. Sometimes insincerity can lead to positive outcomes, but you wouldn't know that in the moment. You're still engaged in a kind of self-deception. Sartre might even in the end say, well, really, did this end up, in a positive way anyway?
If it's not a positive outcome, if it's still a bad outcome, I don't think that completely thwarts authenticity. Even though you're not supposed to be inauthentic.
Well, yeah, with Sartre, there's very few things that are, how shall I put it? Conception of freedom and authenticity are as fundamental, I guess we could say, and static, if anything is, within Sartrean philosophy. And it's not even that case, because we never actually can achieve this tensionless state of having become. That's the desire for being, where there's no longer any change, and we're done with our projects. Well, you're engaged in bad faith if you think you've achieved that. And it leads to what De Beauvoir will call a spirit of seriousness. And it leads to a lot of problems. In fact, there are real-world problems with respect to race and oppression is what we'll get to next week. I'm not saying that your examples lead to that, but Sartre sees that as the seed for it. But I wanted to ask a question about that. Isn't it odd that Sartre can give the example and get into the mind of the woman in the example there and say she's in bad faith based upon, granted, it's his thought experiment, but he's using this based on his hundreds of hours sitting in cafes and watching people. He's seen this happen many times, I'm sure.
Have you seen it happen where instead of being bad faith necessarily, where the person can catch themselves on bad faith, they instead gone down a similar path of inauthenticity by misunderstanding someone and continuing on with the conversation? Because I've seen people
Well,
talk to each other.
it depends how they misunderstand them. Is it a willful misunderstanding?
No, completely oblivious. Both people
Oh.
are oblivious. The conversation goes on as if nothing happened, but
Okay.
in the end, they figure out that there was a misinterpretation somewhere, then they have to go back and find it. But no one knew what it was up until that point of recognition.
Oh, well,
So it influenced all of this conversation that you could say was inauthentic after the fact of the misinterpretation.
I don't know
Even
that-
though it
yeah.
was kind of authentic, but at the same time it wasn't.
well, that's not, so for bad faith, which is different than lying, the liar presumes to know what is true, or believes they know what is true. That's the key. You can lie and still say something truthful, which is weird, because I think it's a lie. I think it's false. And so when I say what I truly think is false, and I'm trying to convince you, I'm still lying, even though coincidentally, hey, what you said was actually true, unbeknownst to you. So a lie is willfully withholding what you think is true. Sartre doesn't use that exactly. He says a lie is willfully telling what you know is not true. That's wrong. I'm just going to tell that Frankfurt. I mentioned Frankfurt earlier. We talked about him in some other context. I think you have to add what you believe to be true. The problem with what is interesting about bad faith, it is a kind of self-deception, which sounds very strange because it's in a single unity of one consciousness. It's where you should and do know better. Now, again, we can convince ourselves. He's very much into psychoanalysis and so forth. We can convince ourselves of something. If we say it enough, that's still an example of bad faith. And I don't think that's quite the example that you were giving. Let me get, so Lucian had a hand. Isaac and then Paula. We'll do 1, 2, 3, and then I'll move on.
I haven't answered my question, but it's a complicated question. But you're saying that Sartre's saying that if you don't have goals or if you have achieved contentment, that's bad faith?
Well, what would it be like to be done with goals?
I mean, I wouldn't know. But
I really, honestly don't. I mean, you can say, well, this person's retired. Actually, what happens oftentimes when people retire?
they work
Early.
They go back into work.
Yeah. Or they just, I mean, yeah, some people can't handle it. So they go back to work, they greeters at Walmart or whatever, or they go back and find something else, or they feel something's missing. But even when they're retired, of course, you're never done with goals, you're never done with projecting yourself. And to say that you are is an attempt to deny your freedom. But Sartre thinks that that's ultimately, you'd become something other than a human, I guess, in Sartre's concepts, and De Beauvoir's as well.
Theoretically, I mean, it is possible, right? I mean, that's kind of the goal of like a lot of different philosophies. I mean, you look at Buddhism, that's
Yes,
one of the,
that's a no-self theory, though. That's right, that's a good point. So Buddhists would argue we need to remove the ego because the ego is causing these desires. That's a very interesting point because Sartre seems to, as does De Beauvoir, look toward this constant projecting goals for the self and others. And there the ethics is. You never, a radical freedom for the self is meaningless without freedom for others because I rely upon others to help with my projects. So it's freedom that includes everyone for De Beauvoir, which is expanding on Sartre.
My question is bad faith predicated on having goals or desire to do something? Because
Right.
yeah,
It requires, it could be both of those. So to conflict, with Buddhism, desire is what causes suffering. With Sartre and existentialism, it's conscious awareness, lucid awareness of our constantly tenuous and in-tension existence of, for Camus, beings who are aware of absurdity, and that absurdity is knowing we cannot stop asking questions about meaning, and at the same time knowing they can never be answered. For Sartre, it's that constant tension between and navigating and not denying either facticity, our past, our contingency, and at the same time recognizing our transcendence and our consciousness and our capacity to will and desire. So it's a little bit broader than that. And De Beauvoir would follow on with Sartre there, but add a concept of ambiguity, as we're going to see in a moment. So it isn't just desiring by itself that causes bad faith. I think that's an element that can be specifically leading to it. I mean, desires are, you can't stop them. But the emotions that are pushing those desires, you are in control of those. When I get road rage, that's something I have control over. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to say it's a moral problem, road rage. And when I'm angry at injustice, I'm responsible for that. And I ought to be morally seen as laudable for recognizing something is flawed in the world. A child is being mistreated, and I feel anger about it. I'm responsible for that anger. And in that sense, it's a positive. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm confused because, okay, so here, right, Mark, went to the doctor, he's in bad shape. He decides, I'm going to start working out. He gets a subscription to the gym, he goes to the gym, he starts weightlifting, right? So at first, when he starts weightlifting, he walks into the gym, he doesn't feel like he belongs there, right? He goes to use the equipment, it's very uncomfortable, he doesn't know what to do, right? So I'm under the impression Sartre would say that he's acting in bad faith, that you're not really a weightlifter. But the thing is, if he continues to do that over and over and over again for a year, at the end of the year, he'll find that he feels comfortable in the gym, and he feels comfortable doing that. So it seems to me like there's a kind of transmutation where a lie becomes a truth, where you can only transcend by denying your facticity. Does that make sense?
Not denying it. Why would it be denying you are past the contingencies of your existence?
Is that he's not a weightlifter, is that he's not in good shape, and that he's not comfortable in the gym. That's true.
Well, how else am I
If he puts
going
himself
to...
in the gym, he's acting in bad faith. But that's the answer to transcendence, right?
Oh, there it is.
Sorry, I don't know.
So, I am what I am not, and I am not what I am. Okay. Enough said? No, it's not. Exactly. If I have a project, I'm recognizing something that I am not yet. So it's not the case that if you're saying it the way, if it's true the way you said it, then any project is already going to be bad faith from the outset. Because I'm always going to be lying to myself, pretending to be something I am not. That's not what the project is. The project is driving toward becoming what I desire to be, which is different. I like how you put it, though, because, what did you say, what is it?
Transmutation.
Transmutation. Well, I mean, because there is a kind of change to the self. And there's always this tension of going beyond, but it isn't denying the fact, right? If I were to say, as it does in The Secret, as the example I give later, I'm a weightlifter. What do you mean? Well, in my mind, I believe it. Well, that's not going to do it. Go lift that 400-pound thing over there, or that tire, whatever they do in the strongman. Go lift the tire up and push it, or pull a truck. You'll realize you can't do it. You can't just happen by willing. So there would be the bad faith, but not working toward it, I don't think. That's a good question. I like it. And so I was thinking of the waiter example when you said that. And then when I read that, I used to be a waiter for many years. And when I had read this years ago, and I never thought, I'm pretending in some way. I'm denying my transcendence by acting as a waiter. I acted as a waiter, and I was smiled, and I did well, so that I could get what? Tips. That's right. I wasn't lying. I wasn't pretending. I wasn't, what does he say? He's a little bit too mechanical. And it's interesting, Sartre was very familiar with the philosophy of Henri Bergson, French philosopher who wrote about laughter and humor. And he argues that laughter is a result of recognizing the mechanical encrusted upon the living. And that phrase, that's what we laugh at. We laugh at humans acting as machines or something like that. Or the other way around, if Bergson was alive today, looking at all the videos on Facebook about cats acting like humans. That's also funny, for the opposite reason. He says, let us consider this waiter, page 59. His movement is quick and forward, a little too precise, a little too rapid. He comes toward the patrons with a step a little too quick. Now, in France, waiters, those are highly renowned positions, believe it or not. That's a big job to be a waiter at a nice restaurant. That's a very revered position, right? way more so revered than teachers are revered in the United States. I'm not joking. That's an accurate statement. He bends forward a little too eagerly. His voice, his eyes express an interest a little too solicitous for the order of the customer. Finally, there he returns, trying to imitate in his walk the inflexible stiffness of some kind of automaton machine, while carrying his tray with the recklessness of a tightrope walker by putting it into a perpetually unstable, perpetually broken equilibrium, which he perpetually reestablishes by a light movement of the arm and hand. I know what he's talking about. I did have a colleague, I guess, who had been waiting tables for a long time, and he would have one of those trays filled with 6 or 7 plates, really heavy, and the metal plates that go over it, you know what I'm talking about? And just wobble. He said, "What are you doing?" And he's so good at it, and he did it on purpose. It made it look like, "Oh, it's going to fall, watch out." But then magically, he just put it back in order. It's like, how do you do that? And he was always, I think he liked having people say that to him. And that reminded me of Sartre saying this. However, like the example of the woman on the date, how does Sartre know? How does Sartre get into the head of these people and say they're in bad faith? That's the question I have. Let me hear from you, and then we'll come back, and then we'll move on. Yeah.
So those are all
Lexi.
examples of times that people have trained to either become a weightlifter or hold a weighter thing really well.
That's right.
But what about scenarios where like it's a lie, but you honest to God did not know that it was a lie? Like I can't lift a car. Like I can't do that. Like I'm not allowed to lift a car. But like in a certain scenario, like something happens, a child rolls under this car, and adrenaline lift this vehicle up. Like there has been cases of that happening.
Sure.
Would I be in bad faith? I'd
No.
be like, nah, I couldn't lift it.
No, because you truly would not have known that capacity. It's not like you're limiting yourself. Somebody asks you, think you can lift that car over there? No.
But like,
I'm pretty sure I can't. It's an ignorance there that's not culpable. And that's not a lie.
so like
It's not a lie if you are truly ignorant of your capacities.
So let's say that happened to you in the past, and someone was like, "Oh, could you lift a car?" And you're like, "I did once."
It depends.
Like, yeah, it depends.
It depends. I mean,
Okay, that would be
is it a
reasonable
small,
response without
is it a
denying-
giant pickup truck, or is it a small Porsche like I have?
Okay, so.
Because they're way less. I mean,
But like, that would be the line to define on whether or not, like, the size of the car. That
now there it gets different. Well, no, just to stick with the Sartrean point here, it matters how much knowledge and access to this you could have. If I'm truly ignorant, if I am a child, to jump to De Beauvoir, if I'm truly a child who is ignorant, I've used the example before of a kid who believes in Santa Claus. Well, that's stupid. Well, it's not unreasonable if I'm a 5-year-old and my parents have lied to me consistently for my whole life. My siblings lied to me, my friends lied to me, my meteorologist lies to me, and on it goes. My teachers and everyone else is lying to me. I'm not morally culpable or epistemically culpable. It's not unreasonable to say Santa exists. And in that case, I'm not in bad faith for desiring something that can't be true. I'm a kid who's been thrown into the world that was made without my goals in mind, or something like that. To jump to this will be a transition to De Beauvoir. But I know I spent more time on Sartre here, but the benefit is that Simone De Beauvoir and Sartre, longtime comrades, their philosophies intertwine considerably. So we're actually engaging in De Beauvoir's philosophy as well as we look through Sartre. What else do I want to say about this? I'm going to skip through that. I am what I am not, right? And I am not what I am. I am what I am not. That's my facticity, not yet transcended. My future is open. That is a not. I am a kind of, my consciousness is, you call it a negation. I don't want to get into the ontology of that, the metaphysics of that. It's a little bit too complex. But just think of transcendence as going beyond to something that is not yet. I am not what I am. I am not merely. I am more than my facticity. I am more than my past. I don't ignore it. I don't say it's not there. I don't deny it. But I am not defined only by it. We tend to want to say, that's a waiter, and nothing else. That's a teacher, and nothing else. And when we take that on ourselves, we're engaging in bad faith. So here's Popeye, my slogan. His slogan is, what is his slogan? I am what I am. Yeah. When do people say I am what I am? No, what are the situations when people say that?
Court.
Court?
Always Sunny in Philadelphia, there's a scene where he said, I am what I am.
Yeah,
And
what's the
it's really
context?
funny, really funny.
But what's the context? Why does he say
I
it?
forgot, but I remember that exact phrase just because it's so.
It's because he doesn't he's like the janitor, and they get mad at him for not washing.
Wait, which one is this guy?
Charlie.
Oh, Charlie, the rat shaggy.
Who's the other guy? Denny?
Dennis.
Dennis? Somebody told me I sound like Dennis.
I mean, that,
I don't watch the show, so I don't know. It's
His
not
voice is
relevant.
higher.
Mine's
No, his is.
so mine's
Dennis's
okay.
voice has some higher pitch.
All right, so the point is, we tend to say, I am what I am, or what is worse, it is what it is, when we claim there's nothing that can be done. I am what I am. What can I do? There's nothing that can be done. As if it takes away responsibility, right? I cheated on my spouse, but I'm a man. It's my manly nature to whatever. This is just how God made me. Each of these cases are denying our responsibility, or denying our society's at fault. That's why there's so much violence. It's the Real Housewives of New Jersey. They're the reason we're all going to hell. Actually, that's a pretty good argument right there. If you've seen the show, I think that's accurate. We didn't just lose, we ran out of time. I don't know that that's really an example. I just like that. We didn't lose the game, we ran out of time. But I'm sad or mad and they cut me off. All of that, even our emotions, that's bad faith. Go ahead.
So with it is what it is it not? Because, like, let's say that...
It is what it is not what?
Let's say, something bad happens, I crashed my car,
Yeah.
something like that.
Right?
It is what it is. I mean, isn't it? Like, I
Yes.
crashed the car. And it's
Yes,
a crash,
that
and now it
situation...
costs money to fix it.
That situation is self-identical, just as my being in itself is self-identical. It is what it is, but I am more than that. That denies my transcendence. I am what I am is pure facticity. It is what it is, pure facticity, which basically says, hey, what are we going to do? But you ran into me. You made a mistake. By saying it is what it is, almost sounds like, yeah, but mistakes were made. No, you made a mistake. And you're denying your role, you're denying your responsibility by using that, and forgive me, it is a cliche, that denies the responsibility of even thinking. This is what I did the paper on. Cliches destroy thought. We don't need to think if we can just dredge up these phrases that are anonymous, that are prefabricated, and stand in place of original thought. Or Sartre example.
What of natural disasters then? Of like an earthquake happens right now.
Yeah.
Splits down the middle, this desk just goes down. I don't have
Yeah.
this anymore.
That's a better example and a more difficult one. But what could follow from that? It is what it is. If somebody told me that I lost my house and my family in the earthquake, and a stranger, I mean, it would probably be a stranger, because if it was somebody I knew and loved, they would show more empathy. But I hope the empty slogan, the empty cliche, takes away the responsibility of actually empathizing with someone. It is a kind of formalized, it is what it is, man. Everything happens for a reason. All right, what's the reason my house got sucked into the earth? Well, I don't know that. I mean, there you get into a kind of, it's a distancing. And in Sartre's example, and in De Beauvoir's example, a removal of responsibility. One more question before we get to De Beauvoir.
Right, yeah, I was just going to ask for you to clarify there. So what he takes issue with is not the statement itself, but what it implies in the context of you saying, kind of implying like, there's nothing you can do. Like, that's the issue he takes, not the statement itself. Like,
You can go-
you made that statement, and you weren't saying it with the intent to, take away responsibility. You're just saying, I recognize what happened in the situation,
Yeah.
I learned from it, and
Well, that's the thing. It's not clear that all those other things follow from the
Right.
cliche. The intentions are not even there. It's an empty slogan that sort of pops out because in that situation, that's what people say. and therefore that is a removal of my responsibility to another human to empathize with them in the moment. Cliché sort of distances us from it. In addition, if I were to say this natural disaster led to the loss of my house, blah, 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 what is to be done? Well, hopefully we try to figure out how this happened, how we can ameliorate it, make it better in the future, avoid it happening in the future, and so forth. And the cliches don't help with that. I'm going off a bit on that tangent, so I want to get to De Beauvoir. End with this discussion here, or end with the two modes that he's talking about in the most general sense. I can deny my transcendence and say I can't do anything about it. It is what it is type of thing. Or I can deny my facticity. I can do anything just by wishing it. And if you're not familiar with The Secret, that's an example of bad faith in denying reality, basically, and in dangerous ways. In some cases, ask, believe, receive. If you've got cancer, follow The Secret. You can get rid of your cancer, we are told. This is a bit medieval and a bit dangerous type of thinking. It is not Sartrean thinking. It's not just have positive thoughts and positive things will happen to you. That's not what Sartre is saying. All right, so that's Jean-Paul Sartre, and now we're on to at least introducing Simone Lucie Ernestine Marie Bertrand de Beauvoir, otherwise known as Simone Lucie Ernestine. I was going to read the whole thing again. She goes by that whole thing all the time. Or de Beauvoir, or just Beauvoir. She excelled in basically all of her studies. At the age of 21, she passed some of the most difficult examinations in the French school system. She was top of her class at the same school that Jean-Paul Sartre went to. And second in her class was a friend of hers, Simone Weil, who has interesting views with respect to oppression that may or may not come up in our discussion here. I'm going to focus on her Ethics of Ambiguity. It's a relatively short work, but very dense, and it I think expands upon Sartre's very long and very dense book, showing how there is the possibility of an existential ethics. So the ethics of ambiguity and this concept of ambiguity is central to all of her philosophy. She is an existentialist, although she didn't really like the title, interestingly, and she's a philosopher and a feminist. All titles of which she was not really fond of, at least early on, but unquestionably she's all of these things. In fact, she's probably one of the precursors to modern-day feminism with her book, The Second Sex, which we only read the introduction to, and we'll see how it connects with the readings from next time with George Yancey, and I'll mention Lewis Gordon as well. So she takes umbrage. Is that what she's doing? She's taking umbrage at people who mock or denigrate existentialism as a gloomy philosophy that's purely subjectivity and allows for anything goes type of thinking. There can be no morals if you're an existentialist, right? I don't know what umbrage means. Did I use that word in the right way, or was I just bullshitting? She takes umbrage.
No, you got it right.
Did I?
Yeah, outrage is similar, I think.
Outrage and umbrage?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's not relevant. I just said that word, and I've been talking about cliches and bullshit. I want to make sure I know what I'm saying.
That's the same thing as I take umbrage at.
What is it?
Like if you said, it pisses me off.
Yeah.
Right? That's the same
Good.
thing.
I don't like the word umbrage. It's a stupid sounding word. So I said it in mockery. Anyway, so the existential is more honest and realistic. What does she mean? She's more honest and realistic than ethical theories that try to find these abstract, universal principles that apply to everyone equally, regardless of one's individuality. It is more honest and realistic than abstract, universalizing theological accounts that attempt to give meaning and purpose and moral grounding of our system through a divine being. Because the divine being could forgive our flaws. The divine being could forgive our mistakes, our unethical choices. Without a God, de Beauvoir's existential atheism says, there's no one to forgive us. And so it's more realistic, more honest, more difficult. Our choices matter that much more that there is no God. This is not new. This is from Friedrich Nietzsche, for sure. It may be going back to Montaigne even before that. There's de Beauvoir and Sartre. There's a ton of pictures you can find of the two of them. Usually Sartre is smoking. In her Ethics of Ambiguity, this was in 1948, and then right after that she wrote The Second Sex. She starts off Ethics of Ambiguity thusly, which she didn't have the very beginning of it. You just had a couple sections of it. She says, the continuous work of our life, quoting from the philosopher Montaigne, is to build death. The continuous work of our life is to build death. It's fascinating how much interest there is in death for philosophers. Plato will say this, going back to Socrates, the purpose of philosophy is what? To learn how to die. What an odd thing to say. That's not how I start my intro to philosophy classes, by the way. Hard to recruit people if that's how you start it. You see Montaigne say this, you see it in Camus, you see it in Heidegger, who borrows from Montaigne here. All beings are beings toward death. The moment we are born, we are beings toward death. Our finitude, which is a motif for De Beauvoir, is extremely important. Actually, at the conference, the humor conference, there was a paper given on Camus and Sisyphus and response to death, comparing our lives and the deaths of our loved ones to the Sisyphusian task of pushing the rock up the hill. And this one presenter talked about the death of his mother, who was only a couple of years prior to this, arguing, and I think rightly, ultimately, that one ought to see Sisyphus, well, I don't know about rightly in this case, but one ought to utilize humor as a means of responding to the absurdities of existence, rather than Camusian scorn. And I think there's room in De Beauvoir to read a similar approach, this kind of playfulness, and in contrast to a kind or spirit of seriousness. Or to go back to Friedrich Nietzsche, he'll use the phrase spirit of gravity, which is a kind of overly seriousness, a somberness, and more importantly for De Beauvoir, a presumption of absolutes. And we'll see how the spirit of seriousness applies here. So, back to the... real quick.
Did you take roll?
I'm sorry?
I don't remember you taking
Oh,
and saying that I'm here.
you're
I
good.
just realized.
You were just now saying here? There's no reflection today, so I didn't bother with it.
Okay.
But I do appreciate you all coming. Don't take this as an example for the future. If there's no reflection, I don't need to show up. So I'm glad you pointed that out. So yes, you have the responsibility to be here. Don't deny that responsibility. On we go. The continuous work of life, says Montaigne, is to build death. Man knows and thinks this tragic ambivalence, which the animal and the plant merely undergo. You see a motif that we've been looking at from Dostoevsky, at least, through Camus. A new paradox is thereby introduced into his destiny. Rational animal, thinking reed. That's an interesting phrase. Have you ever heard that one? Rational animal, yes, but thinking reed. We're just a thing that's alive. Oh, but we can also think about us being a thinking reed. He escapes from his natural condition without, however, freeing himself from it. He is still a part of this world, of which he is a consciousness. He asserts himself as a pure internality, she'll refer to soul in that way, against which no external power can take hold. And he also experiences himself as a thing crushed, or not smashed, by the dark weight of other things. At every moment he can grasp the non-temporal truth of his existence. But between the past, which no longer is, and the future, which is not yet, this moment when he exists is nothing. This privilege, which he alone possesses, of being a sovereign and unique subject amidst a universe of objects, is what he shares with all his fellow humans. In turn, she says fellow men. In turn, an object for others, he is nothing more than an individual in the collectivity on which he depends. As long as there have been men, and they have lived, they have all felt this tragic ambiguity of their condition. But as long as there have been philosophers, and they have thought, most of them have tried to mask it. She's responding to a history of philosophy that sees, this is that last part of it, that sees this division, that sees this ambiguity, that recognizes the tension, but chooses, that wants to gloss over it, that wants to even it out, to seek complacency, either in absolutes, absolute values that are given to us by our theology, by a God, absolutes with respect to moral systems of Kant or Hegel or Descartes that try to establish some a priori absolute moral laws that apply universally to everyone. And she even includes science as an attempt at rationalizing our existence by abstracting away from our particulars to give us universal laws. We saw a little bit of that in Friedrich Nietzsche as well. This is an attempt to deny the ambiguity. It's a tension that will never go away, part of the projecting forward that we discussed before. And we are in, she'll call it the serious man. In fact, the opening that you have starts with this, which I'll jump ahead here a little bit. The spirit of seriousness. Let me give it to you, and then we'll make sense of what she's saying here. This spirit of seriousness, it's similar to Nietzsche's conception of the spirit of gravity that he thinks should be burst with gaiety, frivolity, not frivolity, that's the wrong word, joyfulness. He uses this word gay, fröhliche Wissenschaft, which means the gay science, which sounds odd. It just means the joyful science, joyful wisdom, combining playfulness, humor, recognition and acceptance of tension and ambiguity, and there's a lot to say about where humor fits in that, and our attempt to understand the world, a serious desire to know. And the word serious is ambiguous itself. I can take my humor seriously. I can play seriously. You talked about jazz musicians. These are people who play. That's their job, but they take it seriously. That's not the kind of seriousness that she's talking about. The seriousness she's talking about are those, the serious men, who assume our values that drive our lives are transcendent. And by that, the serious man means they're outside of anyone's lived experience. They're independent of any particular experiences. And they exist outside of us to be discovered. It's Nietzsche's conception of, if you recall, when he said in On Truth and Lies in a non-moral sense, when we hide an object behind a tree and then go searching for it and then find it, that seeking and finding is not very laudable, which is actually quite funny. He's right. The same thing here. We're not discovering these transcendents, these values. We're inventing them. They're inherently reliant upon subjectivity. The value of a thing is part of the actual being of the valued thing. This is not something that existentialists accept. The spirit of seriousness, the serious person, assumes these two things and are mistaken. She says this, man's unhappiness, says Descartes, is due to his having first been a child, which I think is funny. And indeed, the unfortunate choices which most men make can only be explained by the fact that they have taken place on the basis of childhood. The child's situation, this is page 1 of the reading you had, is characterized by his finding himself cast or thrown into a universe which he has not helped to establish, which has been fashioned without him, and which appears to him as an absolute to which he can only submit. Already we see a difference, I think, from Sartre. Sartre's extreme radical freedom doesn't seem to allow for this conception of, well, what's going on in childhood, and why is that not relevant? In his eyes, the child's eyes, humans' inventions, words, customs, and values are given facts, as inevitable as the sky and trees. Think back to when you were a kid, and think back to the pronouncements of your parents. Think back to language, think back to rules. Where did all that come from? Did it not seem absolute? Or maybe you recognize the arbitrariness or the capriciousness or the contingency of it all and when you were young. This means that the world in which he lives is a serious world, since the characteristic of the spirit of seriousness is to consider values as ready-made things, prefabricated. That does not mean that the child himself is serious. On the contrary, he is allowed to play, to expend his existence freely In his child's circle, he feels that he can passionately pursue and joyfully attain goals which he has set up for himself. I'm going to pause on that. We'll probably have to end with this. Think back to when you were a kid and you played. Not played sports, because what are sports? Games. And the games have rules. So did the kids come up with those rules? You're playing soccer. Milos played soccer last weekend. His team got second place. Yeah, damn right. They were terrible to begin with. I don't know how this happened. I was so pleased about it.
Wait, do you mean second place out of 2 or second place out of 1?
Out of, well, it's complex. Out of about probably 8 teams. But halfway through the season, they split the 8 teams up into 2 sections. So there's really second place probably out of 4 teams, really. So probably it was really only... Anyway, it doesn't matter. He got a trophy.
Yay.
Shit, does that mean everyone got trophies? But my point, when you played as a child, you were making, and playfulness, openness, creativity, that's the kind of playfulness that she's talking about. When the rules come in from elsewhere, from someone else, you need to go there, you need to follow that rule. The coaches are screaming and yelling. It's like, what are you doing? My daughter also plays. She's 6 years old, and the coach gets so animated, and I'm the ref, and I get animated. When you're a ref for 6-year-olds, you can tell your daughter to run after the ball. I didn't care. Parents don't care. It's like, go, Lola, what are you doing? As I'm the ref, it's just funny. But there, the rules of the game have been set. Not by them. So it's a different kind of playfulness. It's a different kind of openness. The rules have been prescribed prior to their playing. And this takes us to, she gets into this, oh, damn it. Do I want to get into that? Let me end with this, and I'll return to this playful attitude because I think there's more to say about it. I like what she says also about the drive for the spirit of seriousness within ethics, even with games, although it's less in the reading you had here, with the mystifications of the serious, as she puts it, with respect to the supernatural and appeal to a God, but also with science as well, and the drive for technics, she calls it, or technology, to try and create or smooth out that tension. What is technology if not to make our lives smoother, to make them easier? And there's some benefits to this, of course, but also there's the negatives that she points out here. The attempt is made to find an objective justification of science in techniques, but ordinarily the mathematicians concerned with mathematics and the physics with physics and not with their applications. And furthermore, techniques is itself not objectively justified, this is debatable, if it sets up as absolute goals the saving of time and work which it enables us to realize, and the comfort and luxury which it enables us to have access to. Then it appears useless and absurd, for the time that one gains cannot be accumulated in a storehouse. It is contradictory to want to save up existence, which, the fact is, exists only by being spent. And there is a good case for showing that airplanes, machines, the telephone, the radio do not make men happier today than those of former times. I think that's something to think about as you go home, check your Facebook page, and watch television. Are you made happier by our technological advancements? There's more to say about this. We'll transition into, I'll say a little bit about second sex, introducing Yancey. Remember, the Gordon reading is suggested now. Just read all of Yancey on the existential dimensions of Frederick Douglass from a Bavarian examination. See you next time. So, yeah.
I have a question.
Yes.
The thing I was trying to say earlier, this is what I meant. Specifically,
Let me just write something down before I forget. Yeah, go ahead.
buy that paperclip.
Do you need it?
No,
Oh.
my roommates and I were discussing how I've never bought paper clips in my life, but I have a lot of them.
Umbrellas too. Who buys umbrellas?
My mom brought them.
Oh.
But
Yeah, I don't remember where I got it.
anyway,
Yes.
the top part is my crude drawing and my understanding of bad faith.
is easier than making a choice. I may not be able to answer this because I got to go to another class after this.
Well, anyways, I just put it into different sections.
What's
This one
this?
has 5, this one has 2. This is just moments in time, I guess.
Oh,
So this is where the
oh,
guy's
wow.
like, you want to go to a party? Yeah, nothing. And then, because like it's the next section, the answer, yeah. So I just did that in 3 sentences.
Okay.
But I was confused as to why he said it's easier.
What's easier?
And just that it's easier to make this easy, yeah, sure, choice than to
Oh.
make a true choice based on her
Oh.
freedom.
In the same way that bullshitting is easier than lying.
Yes.
Or telling the
And
truth.
I can kind of feel and understand how and why, but it was just didn't make sense logically.
Oh, I see.
So with the girl and the guy, leading up to that point when he's asking her about the party, he later on says that he believed extending the invitation was polite, and that not extending it would be impolite. And
Oh,
he
you're talking
doesn't-
about the cartoon?
Yeah, the
Oh,
cartoon.
yeah. Well,
specifically.
that's getting a little bit beyond.
Well, anyways, so with that specifically, he wouldn't want to not be polite. So really, if I'm
Correct.
going to analyze why he's asking her, just because he's trying to do the right thing, it's not based on bad faith. But then if I
Okay.
go back in time to when he's interpreting his reasoning for when he's saying he's extending the party invitation because he believes it's polite, that's based on him thinking that she has some understanding of he believes it's polite. For her, it may not be polite or impolite. It might just be neutral in general. And whether that could be the case in this example, she wouldn't even hear him to begin with.
Oh,
And
but
that's not necessarily something that...
Can I ask you something real quick?
Yeah, it's fast.
Is this a description of disassociation or dissociation? Have you ever heard that word?
Yeah.
Dissociation? Is this a description of dissociation?
I don't know.
Do you know what I mean?
I think
I've heard the
so.
word dissociation.
Yeah, but not in a
That's my
clinical
question.
sense.
That's my question. Well,
Not in a clinical sense.
in a
But
clinical sense, this sounds to me like
It's
dissociation.
the facticity and transcendence.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
I am what I am not. That's my future.
Yeah.
I'm not that yet. My consciousness is a negation. It is an emptiness. It is a nothing. But I go projecting myself into the future. So I'm not yet. I am not what I am. I am that the am part is my past, my facticity. It's confusing. It's more just be clever. I think he's saying there. Trying to be more clever. He should say I'm more than just my facticity. I'm not just the historical factors that make up my existence. I can transcend them. And to deny either one of those is being bad. So,
Anyway, sorry.
that's okay. I know. I gotta go to the class.
In this particular point, the girl doesn't hear him, but he does. And so his interpretation is more of the passive recognition